Hello my friends, welcome back. Happy new week. The surviving game begins again. We're together going to survive this whole week, I promise you. First of all, before we start, get it out of your system. You know what I'm talking about. Bald spot, almost bald. Yeah, I have decided to rock this baby until the very last moment, until the very last disgusting patch of hair. I'm gonna Vin Diesel this stuff. So get it out of your system, put it in the comments. I'll be reading and crying. If you don't get it, then yes, I'm going bald. But we begin with news from Ukraine and NATO because last week was a huge explosion when Emmanuel Macron announced that he's not against for sending NATO troops into Ukraine. Now, then Estonia followed, Kaja Kallas, Prime Minister, followed that she's also not against it. And now I'll read you a little funny bit of information that is true and it's so bizarre. Russia 2022, and I remember covering this. We are fighting NATO. 2022 Russian propaganda can be summarized how they play to their people that they're fighting entire NATO and that is why they're taking such huge losses. In 2023 it changed a little bit. NATO troops are in Ukraine. And in 2024 NATO troops are sabotaging in Russia. We have seen it in Russian propaganda. Now, but how do they react to Macron's not opposing sending NATO troops into Ukraine? Why? When, according to Russian propaganda, they already are fighting the entire NATO. Russia, 5 minutes after the declaration of Macron, if you dare send NATO troops to Ukraine, we will declare war. So NATO troops are already in Ukraine, so I don't know. Thing is, yes, the Russian Minister of Defense reacted very strongly, very aggressively and immediately. So this scares them. This scares Putin because he knows NATO capabilities, he knows his own capabilities. There is no comparison between NATO and Russian military capabilities. So if NATO troops really were in Ukraine, Russia would be done for. That's why we see such a strong reaction. But according to Russian propaganda, they already are in Ukraine. So this is a bit funny to me. Now I'll open up another thing. NATO troops don't really have to fight in Ukraine. There's one idea right here, and I'm going to open up this idea later. First of all, what is it? NATO troops would be in Ukraine guarding the non-Russian borders, for example, the northern border with Belarus, also the border with Transnistria, for example, Moldova right here, perhaps the Odessa coastline, and Ukraine this would free up about 50,000, if not more, Ukrainian troops who are right now stationed at the northern border and the southern and western borders of Moldova, for example. These 50,000 troops will be deployed to eastern Ukraine and give Ukraine extra manpower and extra weaponry and everything, logistics. Now, the issue with this plan is that if these NATO troops are guarding these borders, then it would just give Russia ability to bombard these troops with missiles, with whatever they want to, from Belarus also. That would result in direct deaths, and a lot of deaths of NATO troops who then, because they're not there to fight Russia, cannot really do much about it. So it's not really a good plan. But just to illustrate how now people and countries have began to think about this possibility, an option, is great. Actually, the only thing I would say against Macron's communication is that this should have been in accordance with every NATO country. Now, NATO countries, some of them have, the prime ministers and leaders have a lot of balls. For example, my prime minister, Kaja Kallas, she's a woman. She has more balls than most men. She's like, yeah, let's send the troops. I don't care. The thing is, you gotta strategically communicate these messages together as one collective, unified West, not as a separate country. Otherwise, this will give Russian propaganda a lot of weapons. They gain from Western divisions and conflicts inside West. And if the communications go in different paths, like they are, then that's food for Russian propaganda. That's the only thing. My friends, now I want to share you a human story because we all need this. The week is beginning. We all need to survive this week. Let's watch the video. This Ukrainian soldier is rotated out. Now, this doesn't happen very often because Ukraine is lacking manpower, but he was lucky enough to be rotated out. He goes to school. His son hasn't seen him and is running. and crying to see his father. He's back home. These children, they don't know if their fathers are dead or alive, if they have lost limbs or arms, because communication sometimes is and sometimes isn't outside of the front line to the families. So for this child, if you're 8, 9 years old, I mean, I know from my own life, your parents are your security, your only security. And you see your father alive, you thought he might be dead. I mean, this is the happiest moment. I would cry also. I can also cry now. This is a happy moment. Of course, his soldier will go back to the front, but I'm glad at least he got rotated out. Now, I don't want to give you any illusions. Ukrainian troops don't get rotated out. Like Russians, both sides don't rotate troops because there's no reserves to be taken. Almost all of the reserves on both sides are tied up where they are. They cannot be moved for rest. Now, my friends, we'll watch another very interesting video. This is a Russian KAMAZ truck, a logistics truck that just does the heavy lifting of the Russian army. They are a truck logistic army, meaning most of the they're train logistic army, but out of the train hubs, they move stuff with trucks to the front lines. Without these trucks, Russian war effort and the entire system would not work. Now, how is Ukraine countering this? If you counter 100,000 trucks, which is what Russia pretty much is able to do, you got to do it cheap because you cannot waste even an RPG on all of these trucks. Let's see. Oh, our favorite gas truck, first mission, first combat loss. The tire is gone, as we can see. Destroyed the wheel, barely managed to get it out. And what do we see? They dropped these things from the drones. This is the second one we pulled out. The Ural with no wheels and Gaz-66 with no wheels arrived today. Вот так работаем, ребята. This is our combat horse, our savior. 2 wheels lost in 2 missions. This is what they drop on the roads. It's just what we picked up. And look at this, my friends. This is... The thing is, yeah, it's only effective if you actually drive over it, but this is a rebar. It's metal rebar welded together. Making one of these, if you know what you're doing, it takes about 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Cut, 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 weld, done. The cost of this thing right here, I would say it's 5 cents, 10 cents, maybe 50 cents, 50s, on metal price. So it's incredible. It's dirt cheap. You could say it's free because metal is very cheap right now in Ukraine due to a lot of scrap metal. You drop these from drones, you fly the drone back, you're not losing the drone, and you possibly eliminate a Russian KAMAZ truck, logistics truck that can be carrying ammunition that will kill Ukrainian soldiers. So this is a dirt cheap, scalable way of taking out Russian logistics, and I love it. Since every war is a war of logistics, the cheaper, more mass-producible and deployable weapon will win. This is the cheapest, the most deployable, and the most mass-producible. So in my eyes, love it. Молодец. Заебись, as they say. Now, my friends, I'm no historian, but what we studied in Estonian history classes goes with what I'm going to show you now, because Russians study things a little bit differently, and they study the quite opposite. Everything you see right now, just reverse it, and that's what they study. Who in reality won the Second World War? Lend-Lease program supplies the USA sent to the USSR to fight the Third Reich. 427,000 trucks, 6,300 combat vehicles, 7,000 tanks, 11,000 aircraft. Soviet pilots were flying years with American aircraft. They were still flying these after the Cold War started. When the United States got the nuclear bomb, right? The Cold War started, the tensions started, spying on each other started. USSR Air Force still had American-made planes in them by the thousands. It's such a weird fact. 2,300 ambulances, 35,000 motorcycles, 2,000 locomotives. You can see all of this stuff. And I've told you the stories about the canned food that about 20 years later, Soviet Union's conscripts were still eating United States canned food because some of it had gone bad and it was inedible. Some of it was still edible. United States fed the Soviet Union at that time. Now, what the Russians learn nowadays is it was the opposite. Only the Soviet Union and Soviet Union alone defeated the Third Reich. That's what they really learn. And if you're taught that from the child up, you believe that. And this is why you don't understand why America is leading the world order right now. Well, because they won the Second World War, they supplied everything, and they Lend-Lease built up Europe after the war. Now, my friends, Tommy, Twitter user, has put a very interesting comment, and it's priceless. By the way, in today's currency, adjusted to inflation, of course, USSR received over $180 billion worth of aid from USA, and a couple of more billions from other allies. So let's round it up to 200 billion from all of the Western countries. That is an insane number. In today's money, in today's inflation rates adjusted, Ukraine has received not even half of that combined, all the countries combined in the world, perhaps half, 90 billion. And the West is again fighting the fascists, the Nazis, which are the Russians right now, the Russian Federation. Now, my friends, Navalny was murdered by Putin's cronies. Navalny's funeral is over, and I did not want to report on it before because we didn't know what was going to happen, and I don't want to give you premature reports. Now it's over, things have settled down, and we can actually analyze it. Well, first of all, I want to show you some visuals. This is Navalny's church cross. You cannot, well, where is it? Yeah, you cannot see it because it's under these flowers. This is how much Russian people, Moscow people living in Moscow, love him. The funeral had so many people attending it. Police had really issues. They had to arrest people. Not they had to, but Putin's orders were to arrest people and harass people. There was a huge line that queued for days, actually, a few days. That's why I waited, because it took not 1 hour, 1 day. It took days for all of the people to see Navalny's body. It was an open casket funeral. And a lot of the people were saying, oh, Russians are now out. It's the biggest mass gathering since the mobilization. Something is happening, a revolution. No, this is false claims. This is why I didn't want to report on this. And Anton Gerashenko gives us a great short summarizing analysis of Navalny's funeral and how it echoes in the Russian society, since Navalny was the last and the biggest leader of Russian opposition under which the Russian opposition was organized. Now there is opposition, but it is not organized, so they don't really do much big. I'll read you the report. Despite skeptical forecasts about the possible number of participants in the funeral ceremony and the number of steps taken by the Kremlin to make it more difficult to hold it, Navalny's funeral was the most massive gathering in the last 2 years, ever since the mobilization riots in Russia. It should be taken into account that the people came out and boldly chanted, "Putin is a murderer." Yeah, they chanted Putin is a murderer, no to war. Ukrainian people are good people. They actually chanted that. Now in Moscow, could you imagine? It's a repressive terror state and people chanting this. It was a beautiful thing to see. These people were only a very small part of those who, on the whole, shared similar views but were reluctant to come. And of course, because in previous protests, their parents, their girlfriends, everybody had been arrested and beat in the prison cells, so a lot of people just don't want to show up anymore. Thus, if we compare Navalny's funeral with Prigozhin's so-called liberal opposition, demonstrated that it has a broader base of public support than the Z Patriots. Yes, the amount of people and the amount of flowers means that Navalny meant a lot to a lot of people, especially in the big cities where more liberal views are in fashion. At the same time, it should be taken into account that the funeral was not an opposition rally. The Russian Federation is so screw-tightened that any legal or not yet criminalized loophole to express one's position immediately attracts the attention of citizens. Coming to a funeral is not punishable formally, but Russians attending the funeral are not ready to go beyond that. And everybody in the West who was perhaps thinking that this is another kind of riot or revolution, then no. Unfortunately, the Russian mindset is a bit different. And for the 1917 events, there's a lot more to go, a lot more. People had been starving by the millions for decades by the 1917. So Here, the war's full-scale invasion started 2 years ago, and Russians are only feeling the squeeze of the economical sanctions for the last year and a half or a year. So, unfortunately, there's much more suffering that needs to happen for the Russian population to really rise their head. It is also difficult to determine whether all those who came today to the church of the icon of Our Lady Quench My Sorrow are like-minded supporters of Navalny and his anti-corruption foundation. We can assume this is a general gathering of the scattered remnants of sympathizers of the liberal opposition who have no clear leaders. Now, this no clear leaders is very important because Putin is putting people in jail by the mass. You go to a protest, you spend a week in jail, you're released. You're beaten also, and your families are threatened, or you're sent to the front. That's the most. Putin is weaponizing mobilization. All criminals, or even minor criminals who are sent to jail for like 3 days for some minor paragraphs, they get a mobilization letter immediately. So nobody wants to go to the front. Also, no clear leaders. Navalny was the last and the biggest organized opposition against Putin's power. Now there is nothing anymore. And we had two candidates for Russian presidency this year, one woman and one man, who were liberal opposition to Putin and no to war in Ukraine. Putin did not allow them to take part of the election, so he actively monitors and cuts off anyone who even remotely has a following. Indirectly, this also confirms the assumption that Russian society is both tired of the war and demanding changes that would make it possible to change the vector of the country's development proposed by Putin and his regime. In any case, for the moment, this flurry of activity does not carry a threat to regime stability, at least in the near or medium term. And I do agree, it was a funeral where a lot of people attended, and that's it. There was no organized opposition there. Now, my friends, something Lithuania, our southern Baltic brother, has done, and I do love these new small countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, but we have balls. All the decisions we make, Germany would only dream of making Scholz. Scholz, if you're watching this, learn from the Lithuanians. Cars with Russian registration plates must leave Lithuania by March 11th, or they will be confiscated. An exception will be made for cars in transit to and from the Kaliningrad region. They will be allowed to stay in Lithuania for 24 hours. I do like this. Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania now have all banned cars with Russian registration. In Estonia also, you cannot enter from Russia with your car anymore. And if you're in Estonia with a Russian car, you can have it, but if you go out, you cannot come back in. Yes, and these minor actions, they are very necessary, but they have to be done very carefully. Because if you go very extreme immediately, you will give Putin the fifth column. You will give Russian people in the Baltics a way to feel bullied and for Putin to protect these people. So we do it in a balanced way, step by step, analyzing the outcome, analyzing it before making the action, seeing how people react, the Russian-minded people. We cannot bully and discriminate them, but we have to protect our countries. It's a very thin balance we have to walk. If we would not have the Russian minorities in our 3 Baltic states, we would take very harsh actions, and we would, because we're not afraid. But we can't. For our own security, every kind of this action has to be thoroughly analyzed, not to radicalize the Russian minority in the Baltic states. Because right now they want to stay here because it's European Union, it's NATO, big wages, good economics. They don't want to go back. Now, my friends, we'll talk about the Houthi rebels for a little bit. And it's not my topic, so I'll touch it only a little bit. And if I'm mistaken, correct me in the comments, because I'm not that connected to it. But this story is big because it's connected to the new axis vertical in the world, which is Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, and Syria, and some other countries. The British-owned bulk carrier Rubymar has now sunk after it was hit by Houthi anti-ship missile 2 weeks ago. It is the first ship to be sunk by Houthis. It was carrying more than 41,000 tons of fertilizer, major ecological disaster. And Greta, question mark. The thing is, it's not funny at all. It is an ecological disaster. This kills a lot of sea life. But the thing is, Houthis are funded and trained and motivated by Iran. The Houthi rebels are very directly connected to Irani proxy military groups. Iran is getting a lot of money, so much, like unfathomable amounts of money from Russia. They couldn't operate because they're under sanctions for decades. So thanks to Russia, Iran gets billions and they get to develop new weapons. And thanks to Iran, Houthis can shoot and sink these ships, which are very much connected to feeding the Western economics. So this new axis in the Red Sea has a way to hurt Western economics. Now, United States and Great Britain have been aerial bombarding campaign against the Houthis for the last 2 weeks. A lot of bombs have been dropped, but they have not been effective since ship has been sunk. So how the US and the Britain will react now is everybody's waiting for the reactions, if they double down or if they continue. But the thing is, the axes are forming. As I read out the countries who are in the axis now, and they're hurting Western economics. You can say quite directly that this attack here is connected to Russia and Russian war in Ukraine. This is why I'm reporting this. But my friends, many serious topics, and I don't want to overwhelm you. It's Monday after all. We have 4 more days to survive, so I'll bring you some funny Putin videos because there are many. Since, you know, Putin is now very friendly to some very extremist African countries, and they have this Rehi Africa, as we can see from this video, meeting in St. Petersburg in 2023, and just some funny, the video speaks for itself. African leaders meet, Putin is here, all the African leaders, dictators, and what happens? Boom, the guy sits down before Putin, Putin is like, ooh, kill him. He's like, what are you doing? Stand up, brother. Now he stands back up. Putin sits him back down. Oh, FML. Sit down, my friend. And now Putin sits down. In this video, my friends, Putin and Xi, the Chinese dictator, or chairman, are making crepes, the pancakes. Crepe, I don't know how you call it. And Putin is, oh, nice chef. I want to shake your hand. Здравствуй, Mr. Chef. Let's shake hands. And the chef is like, I'm not interested in that. I make food. I don't shake hand. I only make food. Your hand dirty. Let me do job. And Putin, for the second time, like, Putin shakes hand and then tries to show it off as like, yeah, I'm showing Xi where to come. Anyway, sad Putin was left hanging. This is the last one, my friends, I promised, and we'll go on with serious topics. Now, Putin is speaking with his favorite woman in Europe, Angela Merkel. And I'm sorry, this is not Putin, this is Erdogan speaking to Merkel. And he's pulling out Putin's chair just while Putin was trying to sit down. Boom! You sit on the floor, Mr. Russian president. Now what happens? Putin and Erdogan are back later. And now Putin is time to prank Erdogan. How he does it? Shake hands. And boom, Erdogan falls to the ground. Prank has been delivered back. Payback. All right, my friends, sometimes watching these serious videos, you get tired, you get desensitized, all this information. This is why I bring these jokes, and if you feel like you want to click away, think twice, because this is what makes the Western people tired, depressed, and desensitized. If there's only serious war news, no humor at all. So this is why I try to break the pattern. But now we're back to war news. The Netherlands announces it's sending another military aid packet to Ukraine. It will include 22 vessels for Ukraine river flotilla on the Dnipro. And these boats look dope as hell. They are weaponized, they're fast. Unfortunately, I gotta say the disclaimer that they're very easy to destroy with drones, and Russia has a lot of these drones, but still Ukraine needs those boats. I gotta give credit where credit is due, especially now that the United States are focusing more inside. European Union countries need to wake up. And Netherlands, thank you for doing this. If you are a Netherlandian people, it's a democratic nation, meaning you have voted those politicians into power who are now doing this. So thank you, Dutch people. My friends, last 2 weeks, Russia lost 12 or 13, if I'm not mistaken, 12 to 13 aircraft, Su-25s, Su-34s, And the A-50 AWACS, of course, every day they lost 1, 2, or even some days 3 aircraft. Now these are huge losses, and after Avdiivka's fighting retreat from the Ukrainians, Russians were really much like, "Ura, поехали, за победу!" They stormed across all fronts, 5 offensive axes. Ukraine stabilized incredibly fast, and their defensive lines are holding like a steel wall right now, and Russians took a lot of losses. But they deployed their air force in such massive scale. Ever since the first 3 months of war, they have not used their air force like that. And it immediately translated into heavy, heavy losses. Now what we have in Russian Telegram chatters is Russian pilots are refusing to fly. Because out of every 5 pilots, 1 doesn't come back after every sortie. So now they're even sabotaging their own planes, because you don't really fly if your plane has a mistake. So it's not really hard to make any kind of mistakes on a plane. They're, "Oh, I cannot fly it today. It needs some work to be done." So they're sabotaging their own planes because they know they will be shot out of the sky. Because not only the infantry are being used as meat, Russian aviation, their air force knows that if they put their planes over Ukraine, they will be shot down, and they still do it because they want to offer ground support to the troops below. So they just accept the losses and put them on the sky. And now the pilots refuse to fly. That rhymed. Somebody put a beat on that and make a video. And now, my friends, I'll bring you Russian economics. How is Russian economy doing? I'll read you a thread, and that's the last one. So it's a long video already, I know. Bear with me. Why is Russian economy didn't collapse yet? In 2022, the expectation was that Russian economy would collapse after the EU and the US sanctions, but it didn't happen. In fact, Russian economy grew by 3.6% in 23, outpacing both the United States and Europe. But this, it's not that simple. Actually, it's a blatant lie, because Russia doesn't share or publicize their economical data at all. They only publicize very selective data that makes them look good. And if you know anything about statistics, you know that showing the wrong numbers, which are true in their own field but not connected to the context, can give you a very false sense of truth. And this is what Russia is doing. So this 3.6% is exactly this very selected, published Russian data by the state that makes them look good. It is not true in any way. Russia's federal revenue increased to a record of 320 billion, and it's set to rise further still. Mostly, this growth has been stimulated by expenditures on war. The Russian government is supporting defense industries and creating relevant jobs. Now, creating economy based on war is... I'm not economic, but if I make a mistake, put it in the comments. But the thing is, you create economy by creating jobs, for example, by building factories that build computers or bicycles. A person buys the computer, goes to work with it, generating more economical products, or buys a bicycle and rides with it, is healthy, or rides to work with it, making him able to go to work. The thing is, you produce products that will circle in the economy, generating more and more and more. They multiply the economy. Now, war doesn't do that. You make a tank, you send it, first of all, out of your country. Second of all, it will be destroyed immediately. So it doesn't bring anything back to the economy. So war economy will boost your economy in the short run. 1, 2, 3, perhaps 5 years, you will see increased numbers, and these are the dead percentages we see. They don't mean anything. But as soon as war ends, there's nothing left, because only war factories now are producing. Now, if I'm missing my point here and you know more about it, I'll be sure to educate myself in the comments. My friends, I want to thank you for coming back. You give me a lot of mission. I feel my purpose, and I feel I can be of aid for Ukrainian people, and I feel my importance to you. And you do this. You give me a mandate. So thank you for coming back. Thank you for giving my job a meaning. I do value you a lot. Please be back tomorrow, since I'll be uploading again tomorrow. Also, if you feel depressed about any of this war news or United States internal politics or anything connected to Ukraine, the answer is not to look away. The answer is to find military bloggers and platforms that don't make you feel depressed, because it shouldn't be the goal of military bloggers or Western media to make people scared or desensitized or apathetic. the opposite should be true. And this is what I try to do on my channel, to leave you with a good feeling and smile, because you're going to work or you're coming from work and you need to feel good, otherwise you cannot live. So feel good, good vibes to you. I'll see you tomorrow, my friends. Slava Ukraini, and bye.